Hello, everybody. Good morning, and welcome back to the latest edition of the Morning Bulletin here on the Blood Red channel. I'm your host, Edward Kay. Joining me this morning is James Martin, and we're, of course, going to start by discussing Liverpool's midfield. Where else? Fabrizio Romano reporting this morning that Fabinho is pretty close to agreeing a deal with Al Ittihad. He's agreed a 3-year contract, supposedly. Obviously, Liverpool are pretty close to having an agreement in place for a fee in the region of £40 million. And I suppose the place to start, James, is do you think that was just too much money for Liverpool to turn down for a player who, some would say after last season is probably over the hill a bit?
Yeah, I think that's all it is. I mean, I think the club weren't necessarily viewing him as over the hill. I think probably going into the summer, the plan was, let's see if it was just an off season. Let's see if he can recover some of that form, particularly in the new shape. Trent's been tucking in alongside him. Obviously, it's never ideal if you need that kind of extra player for your defensive midfielder to function as you want him to. So definitely there were signs that he, maybe his peak years were a little bit behind him. But I think the plan was probably still to make it work with him. But as you say, the money that was on the table, no one could have foreseen that. Saudi Arabia this summer has come from more or less nowhere. I know Ronaldo moved out there already, but it's really been that wave this summer, hasn't it? With PIF taking over the top four clubs, the money has gone crazy. He turns 30, I think, in October. So 40 million, making the money back on what Liverpool paid for him, and then a little bit on top of that after getting the peak years out of him. And in the middle of what was already planned to be a midfield rebuild, you get money in to sort of accelerate that. It's I think it was just a case of too good to turn down.
Yeah, and I mean, there is two sides to this one, really, isn't there? Because while they're getting, great money for him, there isn't necessarily a wealth of great, realistic number 6 options on the market to replace him. Obviously, Liverpool currently in negotiations with Southampton for Romeo Lavia. Do you think if Lavia comes, and I think a lot of people are sort of expecting that, Liverpool, it's not really the way they tend to operate, putting in multiple bids for players. You tend to just hear that they've had a bid accepted, and that seems to be it really most of the time. But do you think if Lavia was the only incoming in midfield, obviously we've already had McAllister and Szoboszlai, do you think that would be a bit of a gamble? Do you think he'd be an adequate replacement for Fabinho?
I go back and forth. I mean, it definitely would be a gamble, but I mean, if you look at last season, you'd probably have to say Lavia had a better campaign than Fabinho, just because Fabinho was so off the boil. So, you can look at it two ways. You can look at it like that, or you can say, is a 19-year-old a good enough long-term succession plan for Fabinho? Because obviously, with that long-term plan, you're looking to replace peak Fabinho, not the one we saw last season. So, in that respect, it's a risk. But I suppose the other side of that coin is, whether or not we'd sold Fabinho this summer, it was still going to be expensive to get someone in who could, eventually do the role that we've got so used to him doing. So I suppose my gut reaction was maybe not to sell for that reason. Like you say, there's not too much on the market, but there's not going to be much on the market whether we keep him or sell him. So we might as well add something to the fund, I suppose, of trying to get in that adequate Fabinho replacement. And I think FSG are just going to have to accept it. It's going to be a pretty expensive operation. If we can get down the kind of net spend cost of that, then it does make sense.
Yeah, and just in terms of his Liverpool legacy, with it looking like he is on the way out, obviously we had a discussion on the Blood Red podcast yesterday, if you've not already seen that, about Jordan Henderson's Liverpool legacy, but I would imagine a slightly less serious discussion is talking about what Fabinho's Liverpool legacy looks like. I mean, have you got any standout memories that come to mind for you? I mean, the two that strike me are the game against United where him and Virgil van Dijk both absolutely smashed into Dan James within about 2 minutes of each other. And then that tackle on Suarez in the second leg against Barcelona. I mean, I don't know how he got a booking for it, but then subsequently the performance he put in, having been on a booking for about 85 minutes, was just unbelievable. But yeah, have you got any standout memories that'll really stick in your mind?
I think that Barcelona one, it is really the one that was sort of, if you had to show someone a game to sum him up and sum up his Liverpool career, it would probably be that one. But I also enjoyed the back end of that season where he suddenly decided he was going to become a bit of a goal threat Liverpool were really sort of in need of goals from somewhere, and he stepped up and scored quite a few from corners, didn't he? I think he might even have been given a rare penalty in that run. I can't remember, but he had. So yeah, stepped up when he was needed, even in a way that's very much out of his normal, typical Liverpool remit. So yeah, but I think the one is Barcelona, really.
Yeah, I think the goal against City as well, where they had the appeals for the handball, and then we went up the other end and he pops one in from about 30 yards. That one, that was a pretty good goal as well. But I mean, we'll finish on the Fabinho stuff here. Are you worried at all that Liverpool look like they might be heading into the season with only really? I mean, we'll throw Trent in there as a possible number 6 as well, because he has played there a little bit in pre-season. But Liverpool heading into the season with only really Trent Alexander-Arnold, an 18-year-old Stefan Bajcetic, and potentially a 19-year-old in Romeo Lavia as the number 6 options. Do you think that's a bit of a worry?
It's definitely a worry, isn't it? I mean, Lavia would change it a bit, but you look at how we've fared just in pre-season, you always want to warn against sort of reading into it too much. But I don't think Klopp would have been hoping to concede 6 against Bundesliga 2 opposition. So, we've been very exciting going forward, but the defence has lacked that sort of cover. I suppose what you would say is the bulk of those goals have come in the second half when there have been changes to the team. So Trent in the number 6 role has actually been doing a pretty good job, especially when he's been in front of more or less the first choice back line. But then if we're putting Trent there, then we just have the same conversation at right back, don't we? Who's going to play that hybrid role? I mean, you would say Conor Bradley's looked pretty good, but A, he was coming off a season in League One, and B, he doesn't seem to be in the travelling squad for Singapore. He's been left off the list that have been tweeted out there. So that's one to watch, see what happens with that. So yeah, it's whichever way you spin it, it's maybe looking a little bit light in there and maybe a little bit inexperienced. Like I say, I do think Lavia would improve things. The fact that he's young is a worry, but he does have Premier League experience now. At least it's not like he's an academy prospect. He is that little bit further along in his development. So I could get on board with it, I think, but I would still be worried.
Yeah, I think the Conor Bradley one is interesting because I think he's by far been the standout youngster in those first 2 pre-season games. And I would have said the same last year of Stefan Bajcetic. And obviously we all know what a great season he ended up having. So it could be interesting to see if there's a few injuries here or there, if Conor Bradley does get a chance next season. But we'll move on to Jurgen Klopp's pretty important decision that he's got to make. I mean, I would imagine he's probably already made it. He'll have known that Jordan Henderson was going to leave for a little while now. And obviously James Milner, having left to Brighton pretty early in the window, means he's lost both his captain and his vice-captain. I mean, aside from it being, slightly worrying that they've lost both their captain and their vice-captain in the same window, there's no real birth of leadership characters in the squad. Who do you think sort of in pole position for the armband and for the vice-captain job?
I'd be very surprised if it wasn't Van Dijk for the captain, to be honest. I mean, by all accounts, he's been third in line up to this point. We've seen it a bit more in recent times. Obviously, Milner has been off the bench a little bit more often, and Henderson has been maybe subbed off a bit more often. So, yeah, we've seen that in game at least, where he's sort of taken the armband. So I would expect him to step up on a more permanent basis now. But yeah, there's definitely contenders, like you say. There's no shortage of leaders in the squad. You'd look at someone like, Alisson. Personally, I don't love when goalkeepers are captains, just because there's only a very limited area of the pitch that they're in. There's maybe conveying instructions gets a little bit harder in terms of the actual sort of on the pitch functions of a captain. But he is that leader. He does have the kind of the off the pitch aura you'd want as well. He's very feels like he'd be a good representative of the club. But yeah, I think probably Van Dijk for me. And then vice is Trent's time. I've seen a few shouts for him as the kind of captain. I don't think that'll happen, but he is growing into a potential leadership role, and he has always been slated, hasn't he, as that kind of long-term captain. So maybe this is the kind of next step on that road. But then also you don't want to ignore someone like a Mohamed Salah in the conversation. There was that whole fiasco, is a bit of a strong word, but media storm a couple of years back, wasn't there, when he said he was upset not to have been made captain in the absence of Henderson and Milner. Yeah, so whether that's still something in the back of his mind, who knows? But he does always lead by example. You couldn't fault his professionalism or anything like that. So yeah, maybe he's another one who deserves to be in the conversation. But yeah, for me, it'll be Van Dijk, and I'd probably lean towards Trent for that vice captaincy.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything you said there. I think Van Dijk is probably the obvious choice for the armband at this point, and then Trent as vice captain with a view to maybe taking over the armband in say 2-3 seasons time, whenever Klopp decides the time is right to move Van Dijk on. I think it's an interesting point you make about goalkeepers being captains as well. I really agree with that. I think with a goalkeeper, you just don't really want to add on anything that could, you don't want your goalkeeper to be thinking about anything other than stopping the ball going in the net most of the time, really. And I think the armband would be something that could maybe weigh on Alisson a bit. And I don't think he needs the armband to be a leader from the back. I mean, one player who's getting a bit of a mention in the comments is Andy Robertson, of course. I mean, while I think he'd be a really good option for maybe not for the captaincy, but probably for the vice captain role. Do you think? I mean, a lot of people this season, we see all these predicted lineups, and nobody's even got Andy Robertson in it because of this new system with obviously a left-sided centre back if they set up in that 3-2-5 with the box midfield. But do you think that Andy Robertson has a shout of being the vice captain, or do you think that maybe with the setup that Liverpool are going to be adopting, he's just going to be slightly more in and out of the side this season?
I think he's probably still going to be first choice, even if we sign that kind of left-sided centre back. I think it's unrealistic at this point to say Liverpool are going to go out and splash, 50 million plus or what have you on this kind of, immediate starter in that position. I don't think that'll be the case. And Robertson has done pretty well there, to be honest. Like I think if you'd said before we'd made the switch in formation, and Robertson's going to be this hybrid who tucks in at left-sided centre back, maybe there'd have been a few more doubts. But any doubts that there have been, I think it is more or less answered. He hasn't been caught out really in that position. You look at where Liverpool have conceded goals since making the switch, and it's not like that side's been especially targeted. It's still been the right, really, where Trent's maybe not quite got back into the right back position from his central midfield adventures, and that's where the attacks have been funneled. Robertson has been pretty solid, and he's still kept up an attacking threat as well. It's obviously diminished a little bit, but he does offer a sort of hybrid role himself on that side with the kind of assured defensiveness, but also that ability to get forward. Maybe he needs to work slightly on when he can bomb forward and when he needs to hang back, because obviously it's a very new role. But no, I'd back him to do that. And like you say, he does have the leadership traits. He's captain for Scotland. I think he has now been Liverpool captain, albeit just very briefly in one game. There was shortly after the World Cup, a lot of the usual candidates were out of action, and I think he got a brief look in one of the matches there. But yeah, that's the only reason I haven't really given him a hat tip up to now. Really, it's because he's not necessarily been a big part of the existing leadership group. It does seem to have gone to multiple other players before it's gone to him, and yeah, it would just be strange if Klopp sort of threw that out the window now and picked someone else. But if he did, it would be a strong candidate. He's a great leader. He's one of the more experienced names in the dressing room, and again another great representative of Liverpool off the pitch. So yeah, it's a privileged position to be in for Klopp. He's got a lot of good options.
Yeah, spot on. As we said, there's really no lack of leadership figures at Liverpool. As you say, Robertson, the captain for Scotland, Szoboszlai, obviously he's a new incoming. I don't think he'll be getting handed the armband or the vice captain role just yet, but he is captain of his national team in Hungary. So it remains to be seen who Jurgen Klopp does pick for his next captain and his vice captain. But as we say, there's no real bad options in that squad, is there? I mean, I would be surprised if Salah got the nod for either of them. But as you say, if they're looking to keep him happy, maybe less so than before he'd signed, obviously, the bumper contract last summer. But yeah, it remains to be seen who Jurgen Klopp does decide on for his captain and his vice captain role. We will, of course, bring you the news as soon as we have it. We'll have an Analysing Anfield for you today at midday. But for now, that's all we've got time for here on the Morning Bulletin. So, James, thanks for joining me, and we'll catch you next time.